Ah, sit down, my dear, and let me tell you the tale of the golden bird, just as my grandmother used to tell me. It's a story full of wonder and adventure, where even the smallest of us can do great things. Once upon a time, there was a king who had a beautiful garden, and in that garden stood a tree that bore golden apples. Now, these weren't just any apples. Oh no, they were as precious as the sun itself. But one day, the king noticed that one of the apples had disappeared, just like that. The next night, another was gone, and the night after that, another. Oh, the king was furious. So he called his 3 sons, strong and brave lads they were, and said, "One of you must keep watch over the tree tonight, for I'll have no more of my apples stolen." The eldest son, proud as he was, volunteered first. "I'll catch the thief, father," he declared, puffing out his chest. But when night came, as he stood by the tree, his eyes grew heavy, and before long, he was fast asleep. And when the morning sun rose, well, another apple had vanished. The next night, the second son, sure he could do better, stood guard. But alas, he too fell asleep, and yet another golden apple was gone. Now, it was the youngest son's turn, though no one had much faith in him. You see, he was often overlooked, just a bit quieter, not as bold as his brothers. But the youngest son was clever and had a heart full of determination. So that night, he stood by the tree, wide-eyed and alert. And just as the clock struck midnight, whoosh! Down swooped a magnificent bird, its feathers gleaming gold in the moonlight. It went right for one of the golden apples. Quick as a flash, the young prince drew his bow and fired an arrow. Though he missed the bird, he managed to knock a single golden feather loose, and it fluttered down to the ground. In the morning, the prince showed the golden feather to his father. Oh, the king was in awe. "This bird must be mine," he declared. And so he sent his sons on a quest to find the bird. The 3 brothers set out together, but soon they came to a crossroads. They decided to split up, each taking a different path. Now the eldest brother, he was the first to meet a fox on the road, a clever, sly fox with eyes that seemed to know everything. The fox warned him, "Do not go to that village ahead, for you'll only find trouble." But the eldest son didn't listen. He thought he knew better, and sure enough, he went into the village where he forgot all about his quest, distracted by food, drink, and fun. The second brother fared no better. He too met the fox and ignored the warning, getting lost in the pleasures of the village. But the youngest son, he was different. When he met the fox and heard its warning, he listened carefully, and in return, the fox decided to help him. "Climb on my back," said the fox, "and I'll take you where you need to go." Off they went, faster than the wind, and soon they reached a castle where the golden bird was kept. The fox gave the prince strict instructions. "You'll find the bird in a wooden cage. Leave it there no matter what you see." The prince crept into the castle and found the golden bird, just as the fox had said. But there, right beside it, was a gleaming golden cage, much fancier than the wooden one. "Surely," thought the prince, "the bird belongs in a golden cage." So he switched them. But as soon as the bird touched the golden bars, it let out a loud screech. The guards woke up and seized the prince. The king of that castle wasn't too pleased, but he made a deal. "If you bring me the golden horse from the neighboring kingdom," he said, "I'll let you go." So off the prince went again, and once more he met the helpful fox. The fox told him, "You'll find the golden horse, but remember, take it without the golden saddle." Well, wouldn't you know it, the prince found the horse, but couldn't resist taking the golden saddle too. The horse neighed so loudly that the guards came running, and once again the prince was captured. This time, the king told him he could only win his freedom if he brought back a beautiful princess from a faraway land. Feeling a little foolish but still determined, the prince set off again, and once more the fox was there to help. This time, the prince followed the fox's advice to the letter, and with the fox's cleverness, they rescued the princess, the golden horse, and the golden bird. But on the way back home, the prince's elder brothers, jealous as could be, plotted against him. They tricked him and left him for dead, taking the bird, the horse, and the princess for themselves. But they didn't know about the fox. That loyal creature found the youngest prince and, with a touch of magic, brought him back to life. The prince hurried home, just in time to expose his brother's treachery, and so the king saw the truth and punished the older brothers for their wickedness. The youngest son was rewarded with the kingdom, the golden bird, the golden horse, and the beautiful princess. And what of the fox, you ask? Ah, the fox was revealed to be a prince under a spell, and by helping the youngest son, the spell was broken. He too lived happily ever after. And that, my dear, is the tale of the golden bird, a story of wisdom, kindness, and always listening to good advice. Ah, now let me tell you about Hans in Luck, a tale that will surely bring a smile to your face. It's a story about a fellow who, no matter what life gave him, always felt lucky. So, gather round and let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Hans. Now, Hans had been working for 7 long years as a servant, and finally, the day came when his master said to him, "Hans, you've served me well, and now it's time for your reward." And with that, the master handed Hans a great lump of gold as big as his head. Oh, Hans was overjoyed. He wrapped the gold in a cloth and set off for home, whistling a merry tune. How lucky I am, he thought. What a fine reward for all my hard work. But as the day wore on and the sun climbed higher, Hans began to feel tired. You see, that lump of gold was heavy, so heavy that Hans started to sweat and ache all over. Just as he was wondering how far he had left to go, he saw a man riding a fine horse. Oh, thought Hans, how easy that man has it, riding instead of walking. I wish I had a horse. And wouldn't you know it, Hans called out to the man and struck up a conversation. It must be wonderful to ride a horse, Hans said wistfully. Here I am, carrying this heavy lump of gold, and my back is killing me. The man on the horse took a liking to Hans and said, "Well, why don't we trade? I'll give you my horse, and you give me that gold." Hans's eyes lit up. What luck, he thought. And so he handed over the gold and took the horse. Off he rode, feeling lighter and happier than ever. But as you can imagine, Hans wasn't much of a rider. He bounced and jostled in the saddle, barely holding on. Before long, the horse started to trot faster and faster until, whoops, Hans tumbled off and landed in a heap by the side of the road. Just then, along came a man leading a cow. Hans, rubbing his sore backside, looked at the cow and thought, ah, now that's a useful animal. A cow gives milk, and with milk I can make butter and cheese. If I had a cow, I'd never go hungry. So Hans called out to the man with the cow and said, "My, that's a fine cow you've got there. How I wish I had one. This horse of mine is too wild for me." The man smiled and said, "Well, if you want, we can trade. You take my cow, and I'll take your horse." Hans couldn't believe his luck. What a wonderful deal, he thought, and off he went, leading the cow, dreaming of all the butter and cheese he'd soon be making. But as the day went on, Hans grew thirsty. Ah, no problem, he thought. I've got a cow. I'll just milk her and have myself a drink. Hans tried to milk the cow, but no matter how hard he pulled, not a drop of milk came out. In fact, the cow didn't seem too happy with Hans at all and gave him a swift kick for his troubles. Poor Hans. Just as he was thinking what to do, he saw a butcher coming down the road pushing a pig in a wheelbarrow. Hans thought to himself, now that pig would suit me just fine. I could roast it and it would feed me for weeks. So he called out to the butcher and said, "That's a fine pig you've got there. How about we trade? You take my cow and I'll take your pig." The butcher, being a clever fellow, quickly agreed, and off Hans went, pushing his new pig and thinking about the grand meal he would have. I'm so lucky, Hans thought, smiling all the way. But as Hans neared a village, he met a fellow carrying a goose under his arm. The goose had shiny feathers and looked quite plump. Hans, always ready for a new idea, thought, a goose is even better. I could have roast goose, and the feathers would make the softest pillow I've ever had. Hans greeted the man with the goose, and sure enough, they made a trade. Hans gave away the pig and walked off with the goose under his arm, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. As he went on his way, Hans met a man sharpening knives and scissors. The man's whetstone gleamed in the sunlight, and Hans thought, a whetstone would be just the thing. I could sharpen knives and scissors and earn a living wherever I go. So without a second thought, Hans traded his goose for the whetstone. What luck, he thought. Now I'll always have a way to make money. But oh dear, it wasn't long before Hans, tired from all his walking, stumbled and dropped the heavy whetstone into a well. Splash! It was gone, just like that. For a moment, Hans stood there looking down into the well, but then a broad smile spread across his face. How lucky I am, he said to himself. Now I don't have to carry that heavy stone anymore. And so, with a heart full of joy and not a single care in the world, Hans continued on his way, whistling and feeling lighter than ever. And that, my dear, is the story of Hans in luck. You see, Hans never needed riches or fancy things to be happy. He knew that sometimes letting go is the best kind of luck. Ah, the Goose Girl. Now, that's a tale full of twists and turns with a brave princess, a talking horse, and a bit of magic. It's one of my favorite stories to tell, so gather round and listen closely. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess who was betrothed to a faraway prince. Her mother, the queen, loved her dearly and made sure she had everything she needed for her journey to the prince's kingdom. The queen even gave her a handkerchief with 3 drops of her own blood on it, saying, "As long as you keep this with you, nothing bad can happen." Now, the princess didn't travel alone, of course. She had a maidservant to accompany her, and the two set off with the finest of horses. The princess's horse was named Falada, a magnificent creature who could even talk, though not many knew that. Well, they hadn't been traveling for long when the maidservant started to grow jealous. You see, as they journeyed, she began to think, why should the princess have all the riches and power? I could be queen just as easily. So, as they rode along, the maidservant began plotting. First, she made the princess switch clothes with her, forcing the poor girl to wear the maid's rough garments while she herself dressed in the princess's finery. Then, she threatened the princess, saying, "You will not speak of this, or it will cost you your life." And alas, the princess was so frightened that she did not dare to say a word. As for the handkerchief, well, the wicked maidservant tricked the princess into dropping it into a stream, where it was swept away. With that, the princess lost the protection her mother had given her. When they finally arrived at the prince's castle, the maidservant, dressed as the princess, was welcomed with open arms, while the real princess was ignored. The false bride commanded that the real princess be sent to work as a goose girl, tending the geese outside the palace. Now, the only one who knew the truth was Falada, the princess's faithful horse. But the wicked maidservant wasn't about to let that secret get out. She had Falada killed. Yes, poor Falada, and his head was mounted above the gate where the princess had to pass each day. But magic was still on the princess's side, for even though Falada had been killed, his head could still speak. Each morning, as the princess walked beneath the gate, she would call out, "Falada, Falada, there you hang!" And Falada would reply, "Oh, princess, princess, there you go. If your poor mother only knew, her heart would break in two." And so it went, day after day, as the princess quietly tended the geese with a boy named Conrad. Now, Conrad was quite taken with the princess's golden hair. Every day when they were out in the fields, he would try to grab it as she combed it. But the princess had a bit of magic up her sleeve. She would say, "Blow, blow, little wind, blow Conrad's hat away, and make him chase it, till I've finished my work today." And sure enough, the wind would blow Conrad's hat right off his head, and he would have to run after it, giving the princess time to comb her hair in peace. Well, after this happened a few times, Conrad had had enough. He ran to the king and complained about the strange goose girl and her magic ways. The king was curious, so he decided to watch the goose girl in secret. He saw her talking to Falada's head and witnessed the magic wind that sent poor Conrad chasing his hat. The king knew there was more to this girl than met the eye, so he called her to his chambers. The princess, being humble and kind, didn't want to betray the wicked maidservant, but the king was wise. He gently coaxed the truth out of her, and at last she told him the whole story, how she was the true princess, and how the maidservant had taken her place. The king was furious at the maidservant's deceit. He had her punished for her wickedness, and brought the real princess to the court in her rightful place. When the prince saw the princess in her true form, he knew right away that she was the one he was meant to marry, for she was kind, gentle, and beautiful both inside and out. And so the real princess and the prince were married with great celebration. As for Falada, his spirit was finally at peace, and the princess lived happily ever after, with her goodness and courage rewarded in the end. And that, my dear, is the tale of the Goose Girl. It's a story that teaches us to be brave, even when the world seems unfair, and that the truth always finds a way to come out in the end. Ah, the cat and mouse in partnership. Now there's a little tale that teaches us a thing or two about trust and friendship. It's a short story but filled with lessons, so come closer and listen well. Once upon a time, in a little village, a cat and a mouse became friends. Yes, you heard me right. A cat and a mouse. They decided to live together and share everything they had. One day they thought, winter is coming and we need to store some food, just in case. So, they bought a small pot of fat to save for the cold months ahead. But where could they hide it so that no one would steal it? After thinking it over, the cat said, I know just the place. We'll hide it in the church where no one would dare to take it. The mouse agreed, and off they went to store the pot of fat in a safe corner of the church. Now we'll leave it there until we really need it, said the cat, and the mouse happily trusted his friend. Well, it wasn't long before the cat started getting greedy. One day, she felt a craving for that delicious fat, so she came up with a plan and went to the mouse. Mouse dear, the cat said, pretending to be in a hurry, I've just been invited to be a godmother to a new kitten. I must go to the christening today. The mouse, always trusting, said, Of course, cat, go and do your duties. Off went the cat, but there was no christening at all. She went straight to the church, licked the top off the pot of fat, and returned home in the evening. Well, how was the christening? Asked the mouse when the cat returned. Oh, it was lovely, replied the cat. They gave the little kitten a funny name, Top Off. Top Off? That's a strange name, thought the mouse, but he didn't question it further. A little while later, the cat got another craving. She approached the mouse again and said, Mouse, I've been invited to another christening, this time for a second kitten. The mouse nodded. Go on, then. It's nice that you're being asked so often. Off went the cat again, and this time she ate half of the fat. When she returned home, the mouse asked, What was the kitten's name this time? Half Gone, said the cat. Half gone? Now that's even stranger, thought the mouse, but he didn't ask any more questions. After all, he trusted his friend. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, the cat's greed took over once more, and she told the mouse she had been invited to a third christening. This must be the last one, she said. Once again, the mouse wished her well, and off she went, this time finishing off the entire pot of fat. When she returned, the mouse asked, What did they name the kitten this time? Gone All, replied the cat. Gone All? What an odd name, the mouse thought. But still, he trusted his friend and didn't suspect anything. Finally, winter came and the mouse said, Cat, let's go to the church and get our pot of fat. We'll need it to keep us through the cold days. Oh yes, said the cat, trying to hide her guilt. Let's go. But when they reached the spot where they had hidden the pot, it was completely empty. The mouse stared in shock. Where has it gone? He cried. Then it dawned on him. Top off, half gone, gone all. It was all a trick. The mouse realized that the cat had eaten the fat little by little while pretending to go to christenings. You deceived me, cried the mouse, his little heart full of anger and betrayal. You ate all our food and now there's nothing left for winter. The cat, feeling no remorse, simply replied, Well, what did you expect? I'm a cat, after all. And before the mouse could even scold her further, the cat pounced on him and gobbled him up. And that might be the end of their so-called partnership. So you see, cat and mouse in partnership reminds us that trust must be earned, and not everyone is as they seem. The poor mouse learned this lesson too late, but hopefully we can learn from his mistake.